Drama awaits, only on Echoes of Love. The adventure begins in Seoul, the capital of South Korea, in the year 2021. At that time, apartment prices were continuously rising. Because of this, the government imposed strict borrowing regulations, as everyone was trying to get loans to buy apartments, fearing it might be their last chance. During this period, we see a young man named No running to meet a real estate agent to buy an apartment from her. When he arrives, he is shocked to find that the apartment's price has increased within just 1 hour. The agent tells him to either buy the apartment or leave it, since many people are coming to purchase it. So, he agrees to buy it, becoming like everyone else, terrified of missing the opportunity. We learn that in order to buy the apartment, he gathered all the money he had ever saved, took out loans, used his retirement bonus, sold all his cryptocurrency, and even sold his mother's land. He dreamed that the 34 square meter apartment he managed to buy would be the place where he could fulfill all his dreams, that its price would rise, and that he could eventually marry and get promoted at work. Then we move to August 2024. No is now living in reality, in an apartment without furniture or utilities because of overdue bills. He's still paying off the loans he took to buy the apartment. One night, he wakes up in the middle of his sleep to a very disturbing noise. When he tries to go back to sleep, the noise grows louder. In the morning, No goes to work feeling extremely frustrated. He watches videos of an economic analyst claiming that apartment prices will rise soon, advising those who want to sell to wait a little longer. The analyst warns that anyone who continues paying high-interest loans while prices are falling will regret selling too early and will suffer financially for the rest of their life. When No arrives at work, he's surprised to receive a message from his colleague C, inviting him to lunch because he's decided to resign after making a fortune investing in cryptocurrency. At that moment, the manager approaches No, scolding and mocking him, saying that the economy is suffering because of investors like him who take loans they can't repay to invest in real estate. No tries to explain that he didn't buy the apartment as an investment since he lives in it, but the manager mocks him again, saying that the house only made him poorer and that if he had worked harder and gotten promoted, it would have been better than buying that apartment. That evening, when No returns home, he's surprised to find notes from his downstairs neighbor stuck to his door, asking him to stop making noise because her children can't study. When he enters his apartment, he notices that the banging sound is still there. He calls the maintenance office and asks them to contact the neighbor upstairs to stop making noise, but the maintenance worker tells him that the intercom to the upstairs apartment is broken. No asks him to go himself and tell the neighbor, and also to explain to the neighbors downstairs that he's not the one making the noise, since they always leave complaints on his door. To earn extra money to pay off his debts, No works as a delivery driver. When he returns home, he finds new notes from his downstairs neighbor. He goes inside and tries to use as little water as possible to save money. When he goes to rest, he's awakened again by the banging noise, which sounds like a cell phone vibrating. Suddenly, he notices strange movement outside his door and discovers his neighbor sticking another note on it. He tells her that he's not the one making the noise and suddenly opens the door, causing her notes to fall to the floor. No approaches her, apologizes, and asks what she was doing at his door. His neighbor explains that her daughter is in her final year of high school and her son is in middle school. Both are shy and unable to concentrate because of the noise. No insists that he's not the cause and that he too can't sleep because of the same sound. The neighbor replies that her husband is certain the noise is coming from his apartment. No tells her husband is mistaken and asks her to stop leaving notes on his door. As he tries to enter, the neighbor holds the door and tells him that the noise only happens when he's home, warning that if her husband sees him, he'll regret it. No becomes nervous and insists that the noise is coming from the apartment above his. The neighbor suddenly rushes into his apartment, realizing that the noise has stopped, and accuses him of taking advantage of them because they are tenants while he's an owner. Feeling frightened, No decides to find the source of the sound himself. He goes upstairs to visit his neighbor Jean, who tells him that the other residents complain that the noise comes from his apartment and that it only started a few months ago, after he moved into the building. No admits that the sound is annoying, but he's also frustrated because people keep knocking on his door in the middle of the night. When Jean explains that the maintenance office told them the noise wasn't from his unit, No feels embarrassed and wonders where the sound could be coming from. Jean tells him he should have confirmed that before knocking on his door, then asks No for a favor, to go speak to the neighbors upstairs since the noise bothers him too. No climbs up to the next floor, but discovers that the sound isn't coming from there either, nor from the apartments above that one. He finally reaches the top floor, where the building supervisor lives. She allows him in, already aware that he's been searching for the source of the disturbance, since the maintenance office had informed her. She explains that all the building's walls are connected, as if everyone lives in one giant apartment, making it impossible to tell whether a noise is coming from above or below. No tells her that his downstairs neighbors constantly leave notes for him and that it's really upsetting. The supervisor tells him she can solve the problem because she owns the apartment below and promises to evict those tenants when their lease ends in 2 months. No asks her to speak to them sooner, since he can't wait that long. She hands him an envelope with some money, saying it's a small compensation from her. She explains that she's the building manager and it's her duty to remove any suspicious tenants, and asks for his cooperation. No says he understands that noise is normal in any residential area. She tells him she knew he'd understand because he's an owner like her. He clarifies that he's only an owner on paper, since he hasn't finished paying the apartment installments. She says she understands that he can't sell the apartment due to falling prices and is sure that he's tired of the way people look at him. She advises him to hold on a little longer because things will improve once the new high-speed rail line opens, as property prices will rise significantly. Until then, she urges him to help keep the housing complex peaceful. No promises her that he'll endure everything for the good of the community. He leaves, happy with the money and food she gave him, but when he gets to his bike, he's shocked to see someone has deliberately damaged one of the wheels. The next morning at work, No tells his colleague about what happened. His colleague warns him to report it to the police to avoid it happening again, but No hesitates, knowing that doing so might upset the company, especially since the building supervisor had told him she didn't want any trouble. Chong, another coworker, accuses him of being bribed by the supervisor to stay silent. They joke that at least the money she gave him can help him pay off his installments. But Chong insists that this money won't make a difference and suggests that No join him in investing in cryptocurrency, since he has identified which coins will soon drop in price. No becomes upset and tells him that such speculative trading is illegal. Chong pulls him aside and begins explaining his idea. No tells him he doesn't have any capital to invest, so Chong suggests he apply for a new loan, assuring him that they'll be able to pay off all their debts once they sell the coins they buy. Eventually, No is convinced and applies for a new loan, but his request is rejected. Over time, he keeps thinking about Chang's proposal and monitors the cryptocurrencies he mentioned. When he discovers that their prices are actually rising, he decides to sell his apartment and invest in them. When No receives the down payment for his apartment, he decides to quickly use it to buy cryptocurrency. However, he soon discovers that the prices have started to drop, just as Chong had previously explained. So, he calls Chong and tells him that he has sold his apartment and that he will double the down payment once the investment succeeds and he earns money from selling the coins. Chong instructs him not to buy anything until the coins reach 815%, and indeed, No uses the down payment to buy the cryptocurrencies Chong recommended. He spends the whole night monitoring the prices, thrilled to see them rising just as Chong had predicted. Chong tells him not to sell until Liberation Day, so No goes back to sleep, calm and happy, feeling that he will finally be free from debt. He falls asleep with his phone still in his hand. That night, we see someone sneaking into No's apartment, searching through all his papers to confirm that he's been speculating in cryptocurrency. Later, No wakes up to the familiar knocking noise and is surprised to find his neighbor Jean at the door, asking him to stop making so much noise. When Jean comes into the apartment with him, they are both startled to find that the knocking sound has stopped. No tries to convince him that the sound is coming from the apartment below, but Jean insists that if that were the case, it wouldn't be that loud. No argues that the walls of the building are hollow and the noise can travel anywhere, but Jean doesn't believe him and warns him not to start a conflict. After Jean leaves, No is shocked to hear the knocking again and realizes that the neighbors downstairs are watching him through their phones. He goes down to the street to observe their apartment from outside, where he meets another neighbor who tells him that a murder once occurred in the nearby building because of noise problems, and that it caused a major drop in apartment prices. No asks if the noise in their building could cause a similar tragedy, and the neighbor, puzzled by the question, insists that it's impossible, but also admits that he knows No is the source of the noise. Feeling anxious, No walks away, afraid the neighbor might attack him. When No steps into the elevator, he feels a brief sense of relief, until suddenly, his downstairs neighbor enters and pulls a sharp object from his pocket. No freezes in fear, and just before the man leaves the elevator, he gestures for No to stay silent. As time passes, the pressure on No intensifies because of the constant noise, lack of sleep, and the approaching cryptocurrency sale date. One day, he wakes up imagining himself in a new apartment with his mother preparing breakfast for him. She asks if he's going through hard times, and he tries to reassure her, telling her that he's paid off all his debts and loans that he took out for her. Suddenly, his mother screams and begs him to stop the noise around them. At that moment, No snaps back to reality, realizing that cryptocurrency prices are crashing rapidly while the knocking sound grows louder until the walls crack and the floor collapses beneath him. Then, suddenly, he wakes up. It was all a nightmare. He realizes that there's only one day left until Liberation Day, and his profits have risen by 400%. He decides to end his frugal lifestyle, turns on the air conditioner, and orders takeout. That night, he sits down to eat peacefully, but suddenly, the noise starts again. As cryptocurrency prices plummet, he loses his temper and begins furiously pounding the floor. At that moment, there's a knock on his door. He opens it to find all his neighbors gathered outside with the maintenance worker. The worker tries to enter to check the source of the noise, but No refuses, claiming it would violate his privacy. The neighbors' anger grows, as he had always accused them of being the ones making the noise. In the end, they discover that No himself has been making the noise all along without realizing it. Just then, the building supervisor arrives and orders everyone to stop, warning that these problems will cause the apartment prices to drop. The neighbors insist they can no longer live with the constant noise. The supervisor tries to convince them that if the property values collapse, they won't be able to live there either, and asks them not to solve one problem by creating a bigger one. Suddenly, she notices that the downstairs neighbor is recording with his phone. She asks if he intends to send the videos to the media to expose the building as unlivable. At that moment, No starts defending himself, accusing the neighbors below of deliberately playing noises to keep rent prices from rising, claiming that they're spying on him. When someone enters his apartment, the noise stops instantly. The supervisor asks if he's willing to let them search his apartment to confirm that the speakers aren't his. He agrees, but on the condition that they first search the downstairs neighbor's apartment so they can't hide any evidence. They assure him that no one will move, so he finally agrees to let them start with his own apartment. The supervisor tells the maintenance worker to go in alone, but he suggests entering together with No to make things quicker. At that moment, the noise grows louder. No insists that the sound is coming from below, but the maintenance worker is stunned when he discovers a device inside No's apartment. Jean approaches and sees a sound amplifier connected to a phone that's playing construction noises. No breaks down completely. He tries to convince the neighbors that the man below snuck into his apartment and planted the device to frame him. The neighbor steps closer and tells him he should see a psychiatrist before they call the police. Furious, No demands to know when he entered his apartment, then kicks everyone out and starts recording them with his phone, claiming he needs proof that they're attacking him. He tells Jean that the downstairs neighbor climbed through the window and installed the device inside his place. The neighbor, enraged, hits him, and they both fall to the floor. No, terrified, tries to defend himself, but the neighbor pretends to have been the one attacked and collapses. At that moment, the police arrive and arrest No for assault. No is taken to the police station, realizing that only a few minutes remain before the scheduled sale time, 8:15. He pleads with the officer to let him go home, insisting that he's innocent, but the officer tells him they can't release him until they receive the victim's medical report. No begs them to let him go home for an urgent matter and promises to return afterward. The officer asks why he's in such a hurry, but No can't admit that he's been engaging in illegal crypto trading. Instead, he asks them to give him his phone so he can call his lawyer. When he takes the phone, he's shocked to find the screen shattered. He pretends he needs to use the bathroom, and when they unlock his cuffs, he tries to escape, but they manage to restrain him. At that moment, the chief officer comes out, asking about the commotion. No notices a computer in the chief's office and suddenly decides to run inside to complete his sale. He locks himself in and successfully logs into his account. Driven by greed, he waits for the price to reach its highest point. Just as he's about to sell, the power goes out. He's electrocuted and loses control of his body, but still struggles to press the sell button. The officers watch in shock as he fights through the pain. At the very moment he presses the button, the officer orders the computer to be unplugged, and No collapses unconscious. Some time later, the building supervisor arrives and explains everything to the police officer. No regains consciousness, and the officer apologizes for the force used against him. He tells him that the building supervisor testified that the neighbor had started the fight. The officer returns No's phone and repeats his apology. But No appears unable to recover from the shock. When he looks at the clock, he realizes it's already 12:15. On his way back home, he notices the neighbors celebrating, because apartment prices are about to rise again with the opening of the new train station. When No enters his apartment and opens his laptop, he is shocked to discover that he hadn't managed to hit the sell button before the device shut down. His coins have lost nearly 100% of their value. That evening, overcome with despair, he decides to write a suicide note, saying that he tried to be patient but that blind greed destroyed him. He apologizes to his mother and tells her that life has never been fair to him. As he climbs out the window to end his life, he hears a banging noise below. Looking down, he notices that the neighbors downstairs are turning their lights on and off. Furious, he grabs a hammer and decides to go down to take revenge. At that very moment, he runs into Jean, who scolds him for making noise again. Enraged, No attacks him, but Jean overpowers him, knocks him out, and drags him back inside the apartment. Suddenly, they both realize that the noise hasn't stopped, proving that No was innocent all along. Jean then finds the suicide note No had written and reproaches him for not thinking of his mother. No replies bitterly that his future was destroyed because of the neighbors below. The two of them come to realize they need to find out why those people are so determined to make that noise. Jean suggests that they go down together and talk to them. No is surprised by Jin's sudden change in attitude and the kindness he shows, extending his hand to propose that they cooperate to uncover the truth. When they go downstairs, they find the door open. No asks Jean to search for any speakers or sound devices. Suddenly, the knocking starts again, and they realize it's not coming from that apartment after all. While searching through the tenants' papers, they're stunned to discover that the owner of the apartment, John, is the same person who bought No's place, and that he appears to be a fake, since his date of birth is listed as 2009. When they return upstairs to Jin's apartment, he's shocked to find that John is also listed as the owner of his unit. They understand now that they are both victims of the same conspiracy, and that the buyers have acquired the apartments on the 13th, 14th, and 15th floors. Jean adds ominously that this might just be the beginning, and that those people likely plan to buy the entire building. Just then, No receives a call from On, who asks him to come upstairs so they can talk about what happened the previous night. He asks Jean for help, then goes to her apartment. On seems confused and frightened, trying to understand what really happened to her husband, who's still in a coma. Soon after, Jean arrives, pretending he wants to speak with her. When she opens the door, he takes advantage of the distraction to ask to use the bathroom, but instead starts searching the apartment for the source of the noise or any suspicious devices. He's shocked to find a gun, and even more startled when he sees a strange door that opens with a handprint scanner. He sneaks into the bedroom, but suddenly her husband attacks him, accusing him of being a thief. Jean tries to explain that he was just looking for the bathroom. Realizing he's trapped, he defends himself by accusing them of intentionally making noise to drive him out of his apartment so they can buy it cheaply. When he sees that they're about to call the police, he panics, grabs On, and flees the apartment, dragging her outside before running back to his place. By coincidence, he finds the mobile phone that had been connected to the speaker device the police had confiscated earlier and later returned to him after his release. He grows suspicious that it might be connected to Jin's Wi-Fi network. He goes upstairs and pretends that his internet isn't working, asking Jean for his Wi-Fi password. Jean replies that he doesn't have Wi-Fi at all, then suggests they go out together to help him calm down. No declines, saying he needs rest. Later, he begins checking nearby apartments and confirms that the Wi-Fi network is indeed registered under Jin's phone. Determined to expose him, he follows Jin to the sauna, pretending he left his keys there. Jin gives him his own keys by mistake, and No secretly switches them. Inside the sauna, No notices the tattoos and scars covering Jin's body. Jin explains that although he looks like a gangster, he's actually a freelance journalist who gets injured while filming in dangerous places and sells his investigations to TV channels. He complains that he risks his life for the sake of the footage, while the famous reporters take the credit and money. He says his work has lost all meaning and excitement. That's why, he explains, he's decided to do something different, his own independent investigation that will shake all of Korea. He asks No if this investigation could be about the noise problem in their building, since they've both lived through it. Then he adds, in a tense tone, that he senses No wants to kill the people who made him suffer so much. No admits he does want to, but excuses himself, saying he just needs to rest. He hurries back to the building ahead of Jin and uses the switched key to enter Jin's apartment. Once inside, No confirms that the Wi-Fi connected to the suspicious phone is indeed there. He takes photos as evidence, then enters another room and finds it full of investigative reports. Shocked, he realizes that Jin has gathered detailed information about him, his financial struggles, his stress, everything that led him to buy the apartment, and that Jin was planning to turn him into the perfect victim to expose corruption in the housing system. No also discovers documents revealing that the building manager was once a public prosecutor involved in bribery scandals tied to unsafe real estate projects. Continuing his search, he finds that Jin has hacked the building's entire security system and can unlock any door or spy on any resident. In the final room, he finds a maze of wires and sound equipment, proof that Jin has been generating all the noise himself. Just as No prepares to escape, Jin suddenly enters the apartment, forcing him to hide. Jin, knowing they swapped keys, calmly starts transferring the footage he's gathered, videos showing No in the sauna admitting he wanted to kill the noisy neighbors, and interviews with other residents claiming they're afraid of him, especially after the assault report filed by the neighbor. Jin has edited all of it together to make No look like a dangerous man who could actually kill someone. Once Jin falls asleep, No creeps out from his hiding spot and approaches him, intending to kill him, but at the last moment, he hesitates. Suddenly, there's a loud knock on the door. No hides under the bed and is horrified to see the downstairs neighbor woman enter the sound equipment room, confronting Jin furiously and accusing him of being responsible for what happened to her husband, who is still in a coma. Jin retorts coldly that her husband was an idiot. It was he who volunteered to fake an injury so he could be detained by police on Liberation Day, but because of his stupidity, he ended up truly hurt. Jin reminds her that she was the one who said she'd do anything to get her lease extended. She shouts that her husband is dying and blames Jin for it, but Jin replies that his death will actually help their cause even more. Furious, she attacks him, but Jin shoves her to the floor, reminding her that she ruined her neighbor's life for her own selfish gain. He then offers her more money to keep quiet. Enraged, she smashes the recordings he kept under his bed. Jin completely loses control, yelling that he spent months collecting that evidence, then bludgeons her to death with a hammer. Afterward, he gathers the surviving recordings, only to realize that one is missing. From under the bed, No crawls out and searches for it, watching in horror. He bolts out of the apartment and calls the police, reporting that Jin has just killed the woman downstairs and is on his way to murder the man upstairs. But as soon as he runs, Jin tricks him. He was never talking to the police but only pretending to lure No out of hiding. Jin begins striking himself to cause injuries, then throws the hammer toward No so his fingerprints end up on it. No wipes the prints off, but Jin accuses him of being mentally unstable and insists that no one will believe his story because of the chaotic state of his apartment. Jin sneers that everyone will believe him instead, because No is the only one with a motive for revenge against his downstairs neighbors. In that moment, No finally understands. Jin has orchestrated everything from the start, setting him up as the perfect criminal to take the blame for all of it. And since he had already written a suicide note and wanted to die, Jin told him it would be better to die for a purpose, to become a victim of the system, because if the building had been properly constructed, none of this would have happened. No becomes furious, accusing him of being insane, and insists that none of this would have occurred without the devices connected throughout the entire building. Gene steps closer, strikes him, and tells him that this room contains the dream he has spent his whole life trying to achieve. He asks why people insist on buying apartments worth millions, only to suffer from the noise that echoes between the walls, ending up hating, insulting, and even killing each other. The system, he says, refuses to construct proper buildings, the officials exploit the people, steal their money, and escape legal accountability. He accuses Ann of being the reason behind everything that happened and claims that the secret lies behind the steel door in her apartment. He then suggests that they begin their plan by taking revenge on A, and angrily asks why he, of all the residents, was chosen to be dragged into this mess. From Jin's words, No realizes that he was chosen precisely because of his suffering, because he represents the pain shared by his entire generation, young people forced to drown in endless loans just to buy a single apartment. He then understands that Jin intends to publish an exposé claiming that a young man went insane from the noise in his building and decided to take revenge on his neighbors, while the journalist barely survived the massacre and revealed that the tragedy was caused by the building's poor construction, its hollow walls amplifying every sound. Jin even plans to present a ledger filled with complaints from residents of similar complexes about the unbearable noise they live with. Jin believes people will call him a brave journalist who almost lost his life trying to expose the truth. He promises No that his death will have meaning, and then tries to kill him. No begs him to stop and help him reclaim his apartment, promising to assist him in carrying out his plan. He tells Jin that the woman who had been helping him is already dead and warns that if he continues alone, he'll lose everything and never be able to expose the truth. Jin seems to waver, asking about the new plan. No tells him it will involve killing and fabricating a story, that the woman who had been facing eviction for her noise complaints murdered someone and then committed suicide out of fear of losing her lease. Jin agrees to the plan but threatens to kill No's mother if he betrays him. Together, they carry the neighbor woman's body upstairs to Ann's apartment, where they assault and tie up Ann's husband. Jin reminds Ann that when she worked as a prosecutor, she blocked the publication of an investigation about corruption in the housing complex's construction. He tells her that he was the one who conducted that investigation and could have died for it. He explains that the hardest thing for a journalist is to see his work suppressed for mysterious reasons. Ann insists she was investigating the matter herself, and Jin realizes that ever since then, he has been trying to expose her corruption. He's shocked that she resigned from her position and bought an apartment in the same building. He asks her about the ledger that proves she and her husband, the construction inspector, accepted bribes from every investor who built substandard buildings across Korea. When she tries to dodge the question, Jin tells her he's been spying on her and overheard her talking with her husband about the ledger, knowing they kept it hidden to avoid taking full responsibility. She insists she knows nothing about it and that her husband is the one keeping it in the locked room. Jin drags her husband over and forces him to open the door with his fingerprint. At that moment, Ann tries to convince Jin to let her help, saying she knows he was forced into all this. He tells her he's already killed the neighbor who lived below them, and No realizes Jin only agreed to her proposal to get rid of him. Jin breaks down when he can't find the ledger and discovers the room filled with piles of money. He orders her to bring him the ledger, but she admits she's been embezzling the maintenance funds and swears she doesn't know where it is. Just then, her husband regains consciousness and threatens to kill them both. He grabs a gun and tries to shoot Jin, only to find that it doesn't work. Jin, now distrustful of No, decides they should meet elsewhere, but Ann seizes the moment and strikes Jin with a gas gun. She orders her husband to kill him, but Jin pleads with her for help. She coldly closes the door, refusing to save him. When No steps out, he finds that Jin has already killed her husband, stabbing him in the stomach with a knife. Ann emerges and orders No to finish Jin off. Jin tries to convince No not to trust her or listen to her lies. Ann realizes that two people are now dead and that No could easily be blamed for everything. No raises the club in his hand, but before he can strike, Jin collapses from his wound and dies. Furious, Ann attacks No, cursing him for ruining everything and wasting their only chance. She remembers how she used to beg her husband to move to an upscale neighborhood to stay away from trash like that journalist. She grabs the ledger and asks Jin what he planned to do with it, realizing that it was impossible for him to change the world or fix the problem of shoddy buildings, because the noise comes from people, not from walls. She leans closer to him and says that if the noise problem ever disappeared, apartment prices would skyrocket, and people like him would never be able to afford a home. She's about to kill him, but Gene isn't dead yet. He regains consciousness, pushes her away, and orders No to find the ledger and burn everything in the apartment. Summoning his strength, No finds the sales contract for his own apartment among the papers. He decides to reopen the gas valve he had shut off earlier, burns both the ledger and his contract, and refuses to listen to Jin's desperate pleas. To him, they're all corrupt. He leaves the building. Suddenly, a huge explosion rips through On's apartment, and No imagines the entire building collapsing. Sometime later, he wakes up in a hospital, his mother sitting beside him. After recovering, he goes to the prosecutor's office and asks the deputy prosecutor about the ledger Gene had been searching for. The man tells him he never saw anything like that, realizing that Gene had been chasing something that didn't even exist, and that obsession drove him to commit all the crimes in the building. Later, No travels with his mother to their village, where she asks him to stay with her for a while to rest his mind away from the city. That night, he remembers that he burned the contract for his apartment, meaning it now legally belongs to him again. He decides to move away and start over, realizing he still has debts, but he laughs, knowing they're nothing compared to the crushing debt he would have had if the apartment had been sold. Here we reach the end of the story. Subscribe for more.